Alright, y'all. So, in this video, we're going to be talking about the 12 pairs of cranial nerves in our nervous system. These are super cool to me, and I find that they're really interesting once you understand all of them because you really understand how important these cranial nerves are. So, with that being said, we're going to be walking through each of the 12 pairs and understanding their function and their locations. So, there are, again, 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and there's one pair or one cranial nerve per hemisphere, hence there being 12 pairs. These are responsible for communicating between your brain, face, neck, and torso. There's one cranial nerve that is unique, that's the vagus nerve, which communicates a lot more than that, but we'll talk about that later. So, the first two cranial nerves are associated with our forebrain, and the remaining 10 are with the brain stem. So, starting with our first cranial nerve is the olfactory nerve, and this is a sensory nerve responsible for the sense of smell. Now, fibers will arise from your olfactory receptors, they'll synapse onto the olfactory bulb, and then relay information directly to your olfactory cortex. That's kind of a SparkSnote version of how smell works, and it's obviously a lot more complicated, but it'll do the job for now. So, next up, we've got the optic nerve, which is our second cranial nerve, and that's responsible for vision. It is a sensory nerve responsible for vision. So, in this case, fibers arise from our retina, and they will form the optic nerve, and our optic nerve will go back and cross in the optic chiasma right here. And again, similar to olfaction, vision is a complicated subject on its own, but I'm trying to provide a overview and a watered down version just to understand how our cranial nerves work from a very surface level perspective. So these two are responsible and associated with the forebrain, and they're responsible for smell and vision respectively. Now we've got cranial nerves 3, 4, and 6. It's important to know that I'm not going in order here. It's not 3, 4, 5. It's 3, 4, 6. That's because these three cranial nerves are responsible for the muscles of your eye. So I wanted to group them up together. So starting with cranial nerve 3, which is our oculomotor nerve, this is the nerve that controls a majority of the muscles in our eye. It's a motor nerve, and it allows for constricting our pupil, focusing our eye, and even our upper eyelid, which is done via the levator muscle. So, the four muscles that this nerve innervates are the medial rectus muscle, which moves your eye inward towards the nose, your inferior rectus muscle, which moves your eye down, your superior rectus muscle, which moves your eye up, and your inferior oblique muscle, which is responsible for moving your eye up and out. Now, your fibers for this will run from the midbrain to your eye. Cranial nerve 4, which is your trochlear nerve, is going to control 1 out of the 6 muscles in your eye, and this muscle is your superior oblique muscle, which is responsible for moving your eye downwards and outwards. So, again, similar to cranial nerve 3, this will run from your midbrain to your eye. And again, notice this is cranial nerve 6, not 5. Cranial nerve 6 is your abducens nerve, and this, similar to the trochlear nerve, will control 1 out of the 6 muscles of your eye, and this is your lateral rectus muscle. It'll control the outer side of your eye. I know the wording of these might be a little confusing, so I drew a diagram down here to kind of showcase the movements of the eye in pink with the abbreviated muscle name. So SR is for superior rectus, and LR is for lateral rectus, IR is for inferior rectus, IO is for inferior oblique, SO is for superior oblique, and MR is for medial rectus. So hopefully by looking at the diagram and understanding how the eye is moving and how each cranial nerve plays a role in this, you'll get a better understanding of the cranial nerves for the eye and understanding how they work together. So again, 3, 4, and 6 are for the eye. Now, we've got cranial nerve 5, which is trigeminal nerve. Now, this cranial nerve has both a sensory and a motor division. The sensory division is responsible for the face and the mucosa of our nose and mouth, and the motor division is for chewing. So we've got three major divisions. We've got V1, V2, and V3. Now, V1 is the ophthalmic division, V2 is the maxillary division, V3 is the mandibular division. V1 and V2 are both somatic sensory and responsible for facial sensation, and V3 is for chewing. Now, the fibers for the trigeminal nerve emerge from our pons and innervate our face with three divisions. So I kind of drew the relative location down here. So to give you an idea of how that nerve structure might be laid out for facial sensations with these two, and with a motor chewing division for this mandibular one. Now, cranial nerve 7, which is the facial nerve, has also a sensory and a motor division. The sensory division is for taste in the anterior 2/3 of your tongue. Now remember, anterior is forward, so it's going to be the front 2/3 of your tongue. Your motor division is going to be for facial expression, so smiling or frowning. And facial muscles are unique. I just want to toss this in as a side note because your facial muscles actually insert into your skin rather than your bones or tendons like the rest of your muscles. So it's pretty interesting. Just want to bring that up. But your fibers for this neuron or this nerve will emerge from your pons and innervate your face. And again, I just want to point out the numbers here. It's very important. Cranial nerve 5 and cranial nerve 7. Remember, 3, 4, and 6. Went a little bit out of order just for grouping, but just make sure that you're keeping track of that. Now, cranial nerve 8 is our vestibulocochlear nerve. So, big word, but if you break it down, it's cochlear, like in our ear, the cochlea, and that's for hearing, and vestibular is for balance. So, if you break things down, it makes it a lot easier to understand, but this is primarily a sensory cranial nerve, which branches into the vestibular and cochlear nerves for balance and hearing. Now, the fibers for this one exit the brainstem and innervate your ears. Cranial nerve 9 will be your glossopharyngeal nerve. This has sensory and motor functions as well. It'll control taste for the posterior third of your tongue. So the front third was cranial nerve 7, but the back third will be cranial nerve 9. Now, the motor division is responsible for swallowing and saliva production, and the fibers for this will emerge from the medulla and run to the throat. Now, I just want to draw this again just to showcase where the neurons would kind of spread throughout and where they would go innervate. Cranial nerve 10 is the vagus nerve. So we've got sensory and motor divisions. The vagus nerve is the largest and longest cranial nerve. It is impossible to draw. So I had to find a picture online, and I know I love to draw these things, but I could not for this one. So to break it down again, so there's two divisions, sensory and motor. The sensory one will have parasympathetic afferent networks, which if you remember from previous videos, afferent is going to be your sensory network because it is arriving into your brain. So A for arriving, A for afferent. Now, your motor system will be your parasympathetic efferent, so it's exiting, and it's going to be assisting with swallowing as well. Just to make another note, parasympathetic is your rest and digest system, so your vagus nerve is for a parasympathetic function, not sympathetic. Now, your vagus nerve will sense and control all of your involuntary functions, heart rate, digestion, immune system, breathing, etc. And the location for this, the fibers emerge from the medulla and they descend all the way into your thorax, into your abdominal cavity. If you notice, the vagus nerve is very long and it innervates many of our visceral organs, if not all of them. And it's very interesting because all the other cranial nerves are primarily responsible for this area right here, but the vagus nerve dips down all down below. Now, Cranial nerve 11 is your accessory nerve. You got the motor one. So this is a motor nerve, which is responsible for the movement of your head and neck and shrugging your shoulders. This is also known as the spinal accessory nerve, so you'll hear it as accessory or spinal accessory. And it innervates your sternocleidomastoid muscle and your trapezius muscles. So your fibers arise from C1 to C5, so cervical spine, and innervate your neck and back muscles. Finally, the last cranial nerve is your hypoglossal nerve. So there is a motor division for this. Well, it's a motor nerve, and it controls the musculature of the tongue. And fibers will run from your medulla to your tongue. So those are the 12 cranial nerves, and I'm going to recap it all for you with this little chart. So cranial nerves over here, the names of them over here, and you know I love mnemonics, so we're going to be using mnemonics. So cranial nerve 1, olfactory, for cranial nerve 2, optic, cranial nerve 3, ocular, cranial nerve 4, trochlear, cranial nerve 5, trigeminal, cranial nerve 6, abducens, cranial nerve 7 is facial, cranial nerve 8 is vestibulocochlear, cranial nerve 9 is glossopharyngeal, cranial nerve 10 is the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 11 is the accessory nerve or the spinal accessory nerve, cranial nerve 12 is hypoglossal. The mnemonic for that is O, to touch and feel very good in velvet heavens. And there's also another mnemonic for remembering if it's sensory, motor, or both, and it's some say merry money, but my brother says big brains matter more, where S is for sensory, M is for motor, B is for both. If y'all want to make your own mnemonics, feel free to, but that's just what I learned, kinda. But other than that, that's all I had for y'all today. The 12 cranial nerves are super interesting. I personally love them. They're super cool about the brain, and I just love the cranial nerves. Anyways, with that being said, that's everything I've got for y'all. I'll catch y'all later.